she was everywhere. She's still ubiquitous. We have two statues for Clarice in Brazil, not one, two. We have one in Rio, near this apartment where she wrote. Hello everyone, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. This is the Linguist Library, and today we're talking about my favorite author of all time, Clarice Lispector, the genius. So, who was Clarice Lispector? Well, she was a Ukrainian-born Jewish woman who immigrated to Brazil when she was still an infant with her family. She, along with her two elder sisters and her parents, left Ukraine right after World War I, and they were fleeing the pogroms following the dissolution of the Russian Empire. And she got to Brazilian shores when she was still an infant, just a little over a year. This whole journey is very well documented in her sister's autobiography entitled In Exile. Her sister's name is Elisa Lispector, if you're interested. So if you like books, words, and languages, please don't forget to like and subscribe so that people who have the same taste as you can also see this video. Clarice Lispector is one of my idols. I love her. She's my favorite author of all time. And this video has been highly requested. And by highly, I mean one or two of you asked, which is enough for me to be buzzing about it and absolutely take the time to make this video. So I thought, since we're talking about one of the most prolific writers of the 20th century, at least Brazilian writers, I thought we could divide it into sections. So we're going to start with her novels, and then we'll talk about her short stories, and then we'll talk about her chronicles a little bit in her time as a journalist, and then we'll finally close with her children's book. You ready? Let's go. So the first novel that we're going to talk about is Near to the Wild Heart. She had published other things before this, mostly short stories, but by this time in her life, she was already 20, and she had lost both her mother and her father. Near to the Wild Heart was published in 1943, and it shot her to stardom. It absolutely showed the world and Brazil just how Clarice fit into the scene. She carved some space, and she was a household name ever since. She did that because of the groundbreaking style that she wrote in, which was very much new to South America. She writes in a stream of conscious style, in an ephemeral way with long paragraphs, unusual syntax, and unusual semantics. Even for Brazilians, she loves to play with words. She has a very unique Clarice voice. So this is a very layered novel, and this was when Clarice started to be referred to as Hurricane Clarice because of just how wild and untamable her writing as well as her seemed to be. So this is technically a coming of age about an orphan who is a bit unusual. Other people are a little bit scared of her, even her aunt. There's a lot of references to the ocean and a lot of references to water. You're going to see this throughout Clarice's work. She loves to talk about nature. And even though she's a surrealist, environment is ever present. The environment is ever present in her writings. So Joanna meets Otavio, and this story takes off from there. We're talking about a protagonist who's very elusive and unfettered. So this goes well with the title of the novel, Near to the Wild Heart. Her second novel is called The Chandelier. This is when she starts to make her writing a little bit more lyrical, a bit more poetic. Clarice is 24 when this is published in 1946. So this is very much about how one can see the world from a prism if you will. So it's the meaning of existence. It's a bit metaphysical. It's very poignant because you can only give birth to its own kind. So the narrator reflects on childhood, core memories, disjointed anguish that is typical of somebody who leaves a small town and moves to a big town, and then coming back to the small town after the death of a grandmother is a bit of a shock. So we have a little bit of a plot twist, and she's got this very hopeful message in all of her novels, almost all of them. There's always this light at the end of the tunnel. Her third novel that was not that well received, surprisingly, was The Besieged City, which was published in 1949. She was living abroad by then, and this was a very complicated time in Europe. She was in Switzerland. This novel is one of her thickest in size, and the main character is Lucretia Neves. So Lucretia and Ulysses are one of Clarice's favorite names, and they pop up a lot. This novel, we have Felipe and Perseus and Lucretia. This is set in a town called São Jurado, and Neves is ready to marry. Her suitors, soldierly Felipe, pensive Perseus, dependable Mateus, are attracted to her tawdry but not quite beauty, which is a piece with São Geraldo, the rough and ready township she inhabits. Civilization is on its way to this place, where wild horses still roam. As Lucretia is tamed by marriage, São Geraldo gradually expels its horses, and the town strives for the highest attainment it can conceive, a viaduct. It takes on the progressive, more metropolitan manners that Lucretia, with her vulgar ambitions, desires too. Yet, it is precisely through this woman's superficiality, her identification with the porcelain knickknacks of her mother's parlor, that Clarice Lispector creates a profound, enigmatic meditation on the mystery of the thing. So, The Besieged City provides a ground for this intricate experience of freedom that she will always explore in her books. She took a long time off to publish after this. I don't know if it's because it wasn't as well received as her other ones, or if it was because she had so much upheaval in her own personal life. She moved a couple times, and then her next novel to be published was in 1961, and that's The Apple in the Dark. This is one of my favorites, as well as Near to the Wild Hearts, but this is very unique when we were talking about Clarice, because this follows a male protagonist. So we're following Martin, who thinks that he killed his wife, and so he skips town, and he goes to a remote farm area to seek refuge and solitude. But when he's there, he ends up meeting some people, and his life is not going to be as quiet as he thinks it is. So this is Apple in the Dark. Okay. After this novel is when Clarice began painting. Sometime in the late 1960s, 1970s, she started experimenting with abstract painting. So her paintings served as a complementary outlet to her writing. There's a quote of her saying, "If you write, why not paint?" And her paintings have become quite famous. In fact, for the 100th year anniversary of Clarice Lispector, Brazil launched a collection of novels with her paintings as the cover. She's quite fond of the color red, all the bright, hot colors. You will see them a lot in her paintings. And she also does a lot of self-portraits. So the quotes of her talking about the images of herself in the mirror is very much what she used to have to do for her portraits. So there's a lot of reflection there, because You really have to take a good look at yourself to be able to paint yourself. Because in a painting, you're capturing a mood. You're capturing the zest of the person, the very essence of them. And she tried to do that through her painting because it helped with her writing, and vice versa. They were complementary of her expressions of herself and her inner world. So, The Passion According to G.H. This book was one of the ones that she started experimenting on after she started painting, like we discussed earlier. So this was actually written in her apartment in Rio. The neighborhood is called Leme, and the building is very much what she describes in this story. You can still see the window where she kind of throws up a cigarette out, I believe, in the book. Whenever we talk about Clarice Lispector, this book always pops up. This is probably her most famous piece of work, and it's definitely one of the most intriguing and out of the box of the whole collection. So, The Passion According to G8 follows an artist. So this sculptress from Rio one day walks into a room in her house, a room that is white and clear, like an insane asylum from which dangerous objects have been removed, to quote the book. And she comes across this prehistoric, ugly, black, dusty cockroach. And in a fit of madness, she does something to this cockroach. And that's basically the entire plot of the book. It is such a favorite and an absolute stop, an absolute must in the whole collection. It was during this time that she started working as a journalist, and she interviewed just about anybody who was anybody, not just in Brazil, but in the whole of South America. So we're talking about musicians, poets, writers, Pablo Neruda, Tom Jobim, Chico Buarque. These are all very big names. So if you've heard of the song The Girl from Ipanema, the guys who wrote that. She interviewed everybody, and they always gave her a lot of respect. So she had a lot of respect while she was still alive. She was very much the scene. She was one of the most important figures of Rio, the artist life of Rio, of the soul of Rio. She was very much a part of it. All of the artists knew her, talked about her, were friends with her, were inspired by her. She was everywhere. She's still ubiquitous. We have 2 statues for Clarice in Brazil. Not 1, 2. We have one in Rio, near this apartment where she wrote GH, the Passion According to GH. But we also have another one that's in the north of Brazil, in Belém, and in honor of Clarice having lived there as well. So Clarice spent her early years in Brazil, in the north of Brazil, and then she moved to Rio after her mother died. She moved with her father to Rio when she was in her teens. The Book of Pleasure was the next one after A Passion According to GH. And there's a very interesting scene in which Ulysses invites Lori to lunch at the Floresta da Tijuca in Rio. And this is a great place to feel Clarice. It feels like her vibe is very much there. There are benches with her name and quotes from her books, and she has a short story based there, as well as the scene from A Book of Pleasure. So A Book of Pleasure is really a bit more of a romance. In fact, there's a quote from Clarice that says, "I humanize myself," and the book reflects that. So, Lori, a primary school teacher, is isolated and nervous, comfortable with children but unable to connect with adults. When she meets Ulysses, a professor of philosophy, an opportunity opens, a chance to escape the shipwreck of introspection and embrace love, including sexual love of a man. In my opinion, this is really a book about bridging the gap and connecting with people. That's really what I love about the Book of Pleasure. It's just a way to bridge the gap between humans. The next book that followed the Book of Pleasure was Água Viva, also known as The Stream of Life. I really love this title, especially in the original Água Viva reference, because it has a lot of meanings. So there's double entendre. First, it literally translates to jellyfish, but it also means living water, and it's really what the book encaptures. So this is one of her most experimental novels. This is probably one of her shortest as well, and it starts with a coma. So this narrative is delivered by an unnamed female artist who reflects on various aspects of existence, time, the creative process. And she addresses her thoughts directly to you, which can be interpreted as a lover, the reader, or even herself. So this has a lot of Clarice's signature themes. And it's definitely one of those no plot, just vibes no plot, just vibes novels, but absolutely one of our favorites. Now we get to my favorite. And I think this is Brazil's favorite. This novel is ubiquitous. It is everywhere in Brazil. It's been adapted into a movie. There's so many plays that are just based around this story. I'm talking about The Hour of the Star, which was published in 1977. And it was actually published shortly after her death. There's an interview that's been translated into English. At least there are subtitles. I'm going to link it in the description box. But you can actually see and hear Clarice. She's talking about this novel. She's talking about The Hour of the Star in that interview. And be careful if you haven't read the novel, be careful, because I think there is a spoiler in there. Yep, because she's explaining how she wrote it. I remember now. So if you haven't read it, maybe watch the interview later. But definitely do watch it. I love watching authors talk about their work. So this is one of the novels that she has a male protagonist. So this story is narrated by the cosmopolitan Rodrigo S.M. And but it focuses on the haunting story of Macabea. Macabea, who was partly inspired by Clarice's own life. So she moves to the slums of Rio, but she's originally from the north of Brazil. And it's so interesting because the inspiration for this story actually occurred in a real place. It's a food market called Feira de São Cristóvão. And there's, I think the first scene of the novel starts there when Rodrigo sees Macabea for the first time. And there's so many good, delicious foods to eat there. There are a few in the novel that are mentioned, but Clarice always went there on Sundays, especially if it was like a cloudy Sunday. She would always be at the Feira de São Cristóvão. And she would always have melado and bijou, which I love. I just love that idea. If you're ever in Rio and you want to try some delicious food, that's a great place to be. There's a place in the Floresta da Tijuca that's called the Weir of Solitude. And it used to be this house. It used to be the house owned by a baron that lost his son in the Paraguayan War. And the lake was apparently the only place that he would go to cry. It was apparently a place for him to go and be alone, as the name suggests. And Clarice loved this lake, the Weir of Solitude, and she used to go there to write a lot. She had a picture of this lake in her office, and she used to say that it's not being alone, it's being in the presence of God. Solitude is simply to be alone with God. That's what she used to say. But yeah, it's the Weir of Solitude. It's such a beautiful, poetic, tragic place in Rio, if you ever want to visit that. So there were 2 books published posthumously. One of them is The Hour of the Star, and the last one is called A Breath of Life. Now, this one is really in the upper echelons of Code Clarice. I think Jonathan and Sophie, I'm going to link their channels below. They love this book. I know Sophie definitely does. I think that she's definitely one of those hot girls, representatives of the Code Clarice. If you're interested in following her, she does great reviews and she has great recommendations. So, yes, A Breath of Life is also unusual in its structure. So, we're talking about a novel that is actually a dialogue between an author and Angela, his creation. So, it's really about that. It's about the all-powerful author and his creation, and this dynamic between them and this relationship, the exploration of this relationship. So now that we're done talking about her novels, we should talk about her nonfiction. Actually, no, let's do her short stories first. There are 3 short story collections that I want to mention. So the first 2 are just complete collections that were published and stayed as they are. So one is called The Foreign Legion, and the other one is called Family Ties. Family Ties is really popular in Brazil. I believe it was adapted into the small screen a few times. And this one is really lovely because it's not family chains or family bonds. It's ties. It's very delicate. I love it. And the other one is the one that I recently talked about on the channel, because this is the first time that I am reading this collection. This is a complete collection of all of her short stories, and I really love it. It has an introduction by Benjamin Moser, who wrote a biography on her and translated many of her novels. So I'm loving it. It's great. The next thing I want to talk about is her nonfiction, her chronicles that she worked on when she was working for the newspaper. So there are 2 that I found available in English. One is Too Much Life, which was translated by Margaret Jo Costa. And this one it really focuses on her delicious canapes. There's such a diverse, so many topics. She explores a lot. She was free to write what she wanted, and she very much did. She wrote about anything that occurred to her, and it's just so beautiful. And then the second nonfiction that I found in English is called The Selected Chronicles, and this one was translated by Giovanni Pontieri. He translated a few of her novels, as we've seen. And again, this is one of I think he chose the most popular chronicles and then put it into this collection. Also very, if you're into Clarice and you like her writing, you don't even need to be interested in the topics. The story will carry you, and the language will carry you. Lastly, I'd like to talk about her fables. So her children's books are actually more along the lines of fables than they are of normal children's stories. So all of them come with lessons. Some of them have unreliable narrators who are supposed to teach children not to trust so easily. If they don't know a person, don't trust strangers. They encourage critical thinking. I really love the ones that encourage critical thinking. The 2 that I remember the most are The Mystery of the Thinking Rabbit, which this is the one that encourages critical thinking. And then the second one is The Woman Who Killed the Fish. This one is the unreliable narrator who talks about trust. Thoroughly recommend. It's beautiful prose for children. It's very simple. She distilled her wisdom into fables, and it was lovely to read. The last thing that I want to talk about is her biographies. So there are 2 people who have written about her extensively. One is Benjamin Moser, Why This World? And the other one is by Teresa Montero. So Teresa Montero has done a lot of research about Clarice and kept her alive in Brazil. There's been a renaissance of Clarice's novels in Brazil, as well as in the Anglophone world. I think Benjamin Moser is responsible for that. And I'm really thankful. I'm really thankful for that. I love to see. But yes, thank you so much for staying until the end. I think this has been everything. Thank you so much for staying until the end. Please comment down below. Leave me a unicorn if you stayed till the end, so I know you're a real one. Check out the community tabs. I'm always posting there. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.